How do you find that space between mousy and unhelpful on the one hand and being aggressive and intimidating on the other? We'll dive into that very touchy subject on today's episode of The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone to The Buyer's Mind, where we investigate exactly what's going on in the brains of our prospects, those who are considering a purchase decision. This podcast is all about taking a stroll through the buyer's brain. It's about knowing the customer so well that the sale begins to roll out right in front of you. And today, we're going to look at the work of our own brains and how our own approach affects our customers' experience. I think you're going to love this. I'm your host, Jeff Shore. You can read the full bio in the show notes, or you can visit jeffshore.com. I want to take a moment to say thank you to those of you who have offered some really warm compliments on the show. We've gotten a lot of great feedback, especially on iTunes. Thank you so much for that. We hope you're enjoying this podcast as much as we're enjoying bringing it to you. If you have questions that you would like answered on The Buyer's Mind, you can send those questions to ask@jeffshore.com. We've got a list of experts coming up, and I'm sure they would love to take a stab at providing some insight. As always, welcome to our show producer, Mr. Paul Murphy. Murph, how you doing?
Again, greetings from Colorado.
Glad to have you on the show, as always. Hey, Murph, how does it affect you when you sense that a salesperson is being too aggressive?
Makes me nervous.
Okay.
I shut down. I just get into a defensive posture. I don't want to necessarily open up if they start getting too aggressive.
Yeah. A little bit fearful that this conversation is going to get out of hand?
I grew up with a father as a police officer, so anytime somebody starts drilling me with questions, I know I'm being interrogated, and I'm not sure what I did wrong.
Yeah. You know what's interesting to me, I've dealt with a lot of salespeople, a lot of different styles of salespeople, and I see some who are very aggressive. And what's interesting is if you ask them, they don't think they're being aggressive. I think the problem is that oftentimes salespeople don't know exactly what they're doing and the effect that they're having on their customers. But that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to look at this category of emotional intelligence and how we know ourselves. And that leads us to our quote of the day from Daniel Goleman himself. Daniel Goleman wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence, and this is what he says. If your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, if you are not able to manage your distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy and have effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going very far. I mean, that's it. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not going very far if you don't have that emotional intelligence. And that's from the author of the book, Emotional Intelligence. By the way, an absolute must read. It speaks to the idea that you must first understand yourself before you'll be able to effectively serve or to sell to those around you. Now, that's not easy to do, but I'm going to tell you one thing that will help. Surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth. Self-awareness is actually a really difficult thing. The problem is that receiving criticism is also a difficult thing. So if I have a hard time understanding myself and I have a hard time listening to the criticism of others, how will I grow? And my suggestion is find people in your life who will be honest with you, and then go into a conversation without a shred of defensiveness. Don't allow yourself even one moment of, oh, no, that's not me. Go in accepting everything that's said at face value, and then give it a time just to sink in, and you can sort it out. The results can be very, very powerful. But the bottom line, you need to do what you need to do in order to increase your sense of self-awareness, your own emotional intelligence. And when you do that, you're going to serve others far more effectively. Well, we want to let you know that the podcast is brought to you in part by our good friends at Home Street Bank. This is not just a sponsor. This is my lender of choice. I purchased a home recently and used Home Street Bank. If I was going to do it again today, I would use Home Street Bank. Smooth transactions, professional, dependable, great rates, great service. If you're a real estate professional listening in today and you're looking for somebody to take really good care of your customers, go to homestreetbank.com and you can learn more. That's homestreetbank.com. Coming up in just a few moments, an interview with Colleen Stanley that I think you're really, really going to enjoy. Colleen is the author of Emotional Intelligence for Sales Success, a number of other books, a really, really profound sales thinker. Before we get to that, let me bring you our sales tip of the day. And today we're going to talk about how to listen to people who are angry. Sometimes we try to do our best work, but we have customers or significant others or spouses who are angry with us. How do you do it? What do you do when you are trying to listen to somebody who is angry? And I'm going to give you 3 tips for this. Number 1, you control your emotion. Period. 100%. They don't make you mad. They don't have that kind of power. You make you mad. So if you have a customer who is upset at you and you get mad, that was your choice. You control your emotions. You can choose to keep your own emotions in check when someone else is angry, or you can choose to stoop to their level. And you know what the problem with that is? If a customer is mad and I come in a very positive mindset and I can bring them up to a positive perspective over time, do I win? Yeah, I do. But if they're in a very negative frame of mind and I meet them in that negativity, do they win? No, they don't. Nobody wins when you go negative. Tip number 1, you control your emotions. Tip number 2, tell me more. This is the phrase that you want to use. Tell me more. See, our natural response when somebody is angry with us is to shut them down. It's to cut off the conversation. Because let's face it, the experience is unpleasant while they are doing that talking while they're angry. But using the tell me more technique is going to force that person to get to the base reasoning behind the emotion. It moves them into their logical brain. You can't win an emotional argument with a customer who's upset. You know why? Because you're outgunned. They'll always have more emotion than you do. You can't play the is not game. It's just tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. Let them talk until they're talking out of the logical side of their brain. Tip number 3, start your solution with the word let's. L-E-T'-S, as in, let's do this. I want to encourage you to put yourself in the same boat with your customer. Their problem is your problem. Your solution is their solution. Get on the same page. So whatever your solution is, start with the word let's. Look, let's do this, okay? Right from the very beginning, you're saying to your customer that I'm with you on this, that I'm vested in this together. Hey, before we get to our interview, let me tell you about an opportunity. I want to invite you to join us for the 2017 Jeff Shore Sales Leadership Summit and Exposition to become a better leader for your career, for your team, to grow in ways that you never thought possible and take your career to the next level. Now, this is specifically targeted towards real estate executives, but we've had people outside the real estate industry who've gotten so much out of this. As the premier industry gathering, you're going to learn from the best of the best about what it takes to make you a better leader, a better manager, a better coach, with more insights, with more actionable strategies, with more aha moments than ever before. You're going to come away from the summit confident that you possess the tools and the knowledge not only to succeed, but to truly change the world. And I have to tell you one other thing. We do this at the Lowe's Coronado Resort in beautiful, just outside of San Diego. We do it on a Thursday, Friday. Most of our guests, hundreds of guests, spend the weekend. We've done this year after year. They spend the weekend in San Diego, and there are worse places to be in August than San Diego. It's a beautiful city. You're going to come away renewed and refreshed. You can find more information about the summit and other exclusive training events throughout the year for sales leaders and for sales pros at jeffshore.com/events. All right, well, I'm so excited to have Colleen Stanley on the program today. Colleen is the founder and president of Sales Leadership, Inc. You can find her work at salesleadershipdevelopment.com, salesleadershipdevelopment.com. Colleen is the creator of the EI Selling System, the author of 2 books, including Emotional Intelligence for Sales Success, available in 6 languages, so you know she's had some success there. She's a legend in sales leadership circles, recognized by Salesforce as one of the most influential sales figures in the 21st century. I would read some of her other awards and recognitions, but it would basically take up all of our time. So I'm just going to skip forward and say, welcome, Colleen. Thanks for being here.
And Jeff, thank you. And thank you for the kind words.
You just got back from Milan, Italy, doing some work with the great Robert Cialdini. How was the trip? How was the event?
You know what? It was just great. I mean, everything from Performance Strategies was a conference we were both speaking at. And, the Italian people are warm, lovely, professional, and the country is absolutely wonderful, both in culture and scenery. So I have absolutely no complaints. It was a wonderful trip.
Absolutely. My wife and I celebrated our 30th last year. We spent a few weeks in Europe, and we ended it starting in Siena, Tuscany, and then ending in Como. So we were in Milan for a little while. And just loved it. And like you, the Italian people are just wonderful. Hope you got a little R&R time while you were there.
We did. We actually went up by Lake Como. We went to an area called Varenna. And so it's lovely, it's peaceful, and we managed to do some good contribution to the local economy with the shopping. And I have eaten enough pasta to last me for a year. So now I'm going to the gym.
That's awesome. Well, that's actually where we stayed. We stayed in that town right on the water, and it was magical. It was just great. Let's talk a little bit about your expertise in emotional intelligence, and perhaps we can go back and reset this a little bit. Let's start with just a definition of emotional intelligence so we can make sure we're all on the same page here.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of definitions, Jeff, out there. And I always like to tell my clients, let's distill it down to the very simple definition. And it is really knowing what emotion you're feeling, why you're feeling the emotion. And then really the big question, I think, is how your emotional state affects others. So are you getting triggered, or are you being the triggered, which can cause then, how do we interact and collaborate with people? So it's the really what, why, and how formula for me in the definition.
So if I looked at that and just simplified it to, I'll just think of the most common relationship that I know with my wife. There's this idea right from the very beginning that how well I know myself. Am I being triggered by something she says, or am I triggering? That can work both ways. I could trigger something positive. I could trigger something negative. I need to be able to understand myself in order to manage that relationship well.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to put it, because am I being triggered, or am I the trigger? So I know for my husband and I did not realize this, but I had a habit of speaking, and I would ask the question, is there a reason you did that? And I had no malice towards the question, and it's a trigger. So we start laughing about it. He goes, when you ask a question that way, you're going to get a defensive response. Mm-hmm. So, at that point, it's up to me to have that recognition. It doesn't matter whether it's logical or not that it's triggering another person. If I want to make a difference in the conversation, I change the conversation.
Do you see a very strong correlation between the level of emotional intelligence in a salesperson and their overall success?
I do. And I think it shows up in a lot of different areas. Some is, really how much they even enjoy the sales profession, Jeff, because, if you aren't able to manage the ups and downs of sales, you're going to have those days where you thought that $100,000 deal was coming in, and then all of a sudden a new decision maker moves in, or the company's getting sold, right? And so you can have highs and lows there. And as a result, your emotions are running your day and your life, rather than you checking those, saying, okay, this is called life. I have a full pipeline. There will be another day to sell and close business. So, even just from how you manage the day-to-day emotions, I think lends to the enjoyment, which lends to longevity in any business.
This is fascinating because I'm just trying to trace back here. I've been in the sales business for 30 years, but my passion is really about the psychology of a purchase decision, right? That's what I want to do. I want to break apart the purchase decision. I want to see what's going on in the buyer's brain. That's really what this podcast is all about. Your passion is really understanding the emotional intelligence, and I'm going to assume that's on both sides, the buyers and the sellers. How did that strike you? How did that grab you? How did this become your expertise?
Well, it started with relationships. So I have two colleagues in the business, Scott Helford and Marty Lassen, and they run a business called Complete Intelligence. And so they had taught emotional intelligence, the leadership world for years. And we've known each other, and they said, you need to start incorporating this into your consultative sales training processes. So I had deep expertise there. And the more I started studying the soft skills, I had this epiphany that this is really the bridge to the knowing and doing gap. Because let's face it, we do live in the information age. Salespeople have lots of tips and tools, but they still aren't applying it. So I often have found now with my study that if they're not executing a hard skill that they've been taught well, there's generally a soft skill that is impacting the execution of the hard skill. So that's what gave me the intrigue, is really how do we get people to execute the skills that they know and should use to make them, themselves and their companies more successful.
Yeah, that's fascinating because, I often teach managers that if their salespeople aren't doing what you want them to do, it's always going to come down to two things. Either they can't or they won't. If it's a can't problem, that's a training situation. If it's a won't problem, it's much more on the motivation or the softer side. And I think we oftentimes, like you, I get a call and say, hey, come in here and teach my salespeople to follow up. Okay. Have you ever taught them to follow up? Yes, but they're not doing it. Okay.
Yes.
Why do you think I'm going to do it? So they're looking for a technical solution to what is not a technical problem.
Right. And, we've started positioning that as the sales EQ and the sales IQ. And the sales IQ is important. It's the hard selling skills that you and I teach. It's product knowledge. It's people knowledge. But the sales EQ is the piece that's been missing in, I think, organizations. And, and frankly, your work in psychology is right in line with this. What's the real reason? Because they have been taught the skills. So very good alignment.
As sales leaders, we're always evaluating sales professionals. We're placing them on something of a scale, somewhere between scared and mousy on the one end, even to the point where, they're essentially not doing their job. They're not moving the sale along because they want to be loved and they're afraid of being seen in that negative light. On the other end, you've got salespeople who are aggressive, intimidating, at times maybe even manipulative. First of all, in your opinion, which is the greater crime?
Well, probably the greatest crime is that the sales manager hired such a person. So let's start.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. I love it. Yeah.
And believe me, I've made my share of hiring mistakes.
Yeah, sure.
But this is a great place to show the knowing and doing gap here, because let's say you have a salesperson that is a little bit mousy, okay? Well, that might be due to lack of assertiveness. They have trouble stating what they need nicely, right? So they fall into go along to get along behavior. So they agree to write practice proposals. They discount when they shouldn't because they want to be liked, or they don't know how to state what they need. But now on the opposite side of assertiveness is what you call aggressive behavior. And these people actually can state what they need. They just leave a lot of bloodied bodies in the conversation. And so it's interesting, just with that, assertiveness skill, you can see passive aggressive behavior or aggressive behavior. And those can play out in the sales function in really just how you set it up, mousy or aggressive.
Right. But it still comes down, actually, I don't want to presume this. What can you teach emotional intelligence? Or as a sales leader, you just look at it and say, this person has it or they don't, and I'm not hiring them if they don't. I got to bring people on who've already got this figured out.
Well, isn't that, it's always the question, right? Now, two things, let's answer it. Yes, emotional intelligence can be taught, learned if you've got the student that's got focus and commitment, right? But then for the sales manager, realistically, depending on the size of the organization, is how much time do they have to train and get somebody up to speed? Right. So you can teach it, but it always goes back to how much onboarding time. And I do think it depends on the skill that they need to teach, because I would say, for example, myself, there's an emotional intelligence skill called impulse control. And certain skills can be very situational. So I am a person that is very situational in impulse control. I can work for hours on something, and then at the same time, I'm that person that has something fly out of my mouth, and I later go, did I really say that, right? So I have worked on, the end of it where I pause before I speak, and that's a learned skill.
That's a great example. When you look at emotional intelligence and where it is formed, let's talk about the whole nature nurture thing. I was at a fascinating conversation with one of the directors of human resources from Zappos. We had taken the Zappos tour. It was absolutely incredible. And Zappos is known for really, really strong customer service. And I asked about customer service training specifically, about what customer service programs they train on and how they form them. this HR director looked at me like I have a hole in my head. And she looked at me and she said, customer service training? That was the parents' job. If the parents didn't figure this out in the 20-something years that these kids lived at home, you really think we can put them through a 3-week process and teach them how to take care of a customer? So there's the whole side of it that when I look at emotional intelligence, how much of this is just upbringing versus personality style?
Well, I think it's a great point. And actually, and I wish I had this quote better for you, but I just finished Sheryl Sandberg's book, Option B.
Yeah.
And she cites a research from, I believe it's a school in Denmark. So this is where I'll be a little bit careful. But basically, they are teaching kids empathy. And the kids will get together and they will talk about their feelings or about how their behaviors landed on another human being. Mm-hmm. And so if you can teach someone at that age, it's a paying attention skill. And I was just working with the director of learning and development at a company yesterday, and she's got 2 small children. And we were having the conversation, and she's very intentional about teaching her young son, well, how do you think your actions impacted your teacher? How do you think your actions impacted other kids? And you know what? You're right. It starts when they're young because it's very hard to teach empathy when they get older. You can improve on it, but you will see that's a paying attention skill that can be taught in those early years, and it can serve them greatly in their adult years.
And by the way, you're the second person this week to reference the book Option B, so I think I need to put that on my reading list here. When we're looking at emotional intelligence, there's this keyword emotion here, and it's something that's always fascinating to me. I've actually had on a few different behavioral economists on the program to talk specifically about the role of emotion. How emotional is a salesperson allowed to be in the sales process? And here I'm going to ask you both from your expertise in emotional intelligence, but also your long-term expertise in the sales process in general. How emotional is a salesperson allowed to be?
Well, there's almost 2 answers here that I'll give you, Jeff. So one is, I would say on a sales call, you need to remain emotionally detached. Now that sounds very cold and calculating, but here's what I mean by it. You know, when you're on a sales call with a prospect, it can run one of 2 ways, and there's a gray area. But let's say you've got a more challenging prospect. Well, if you start reacting and being triggered by their behavior, you're becoming emotionally involved. But at the same time, you can have that really positive prospect. They're saying all the right things we need to, and you get really emotionally involved again, positively. Mm-hmm. Well, what I've seen with both types, when you allow yourself to get emotionally involved, you get off your sales playbook. So with the defensive or challenging prospect, you don't ask all the questions because you move into that survival response, fight or flight. And with the positive prospect, you don't ask all the questions because you think you've got one. So I would say remain emotionally detached in a nice way, but remain emotionally cued into what they're thinking or feeling. And when you're remaining emotionally detached but more focused on them, then you pick up all the emotional cues, and then you can adjust the conversation. So I hope that makes sense in how I explain it.
Well, let me give you an example back, and you can tell me whether I've got it right here. It sounds to me a little bit like you were talking about a physician with really good bedside manner, because certainly the emotion that I'm hearing from a patient who is in pain or dealing with some sort of medical problem is going to affect the way that I see that person. But I have got to be able to recognize I have a job to do here, and I don't want to fall into this so much that it's going to change the way that I'm supposed to objectively see the problem.
That's a perfect example, because it doesn't mean the physician doesn't care, but when we can remain that objective person, we actually get beyond the presenting problem, because just like a physician, often the presenting problem that they're seeing from the patient isn't the real problem.
Now, here's the flip side to that, and so let me just challenge you on the other side. Sometimes we see salespeople who, if they're happy to be there, boy, they sure didn't let their face know. Because you look at that salesperson, there's no energy, there's no emotion, it's all procedural, and they end up dragging down the emotional altitude of that conversation. So I assume there's a downside to being completely emotionally detached.
Well, and I'd actually say this might be a different perspective. There's actually an attribute called emotional expression. And when you study conversation and communication, most of it is occurring, especially if you're in a face-to-face, it's what your face is saying, right? Or, tonality, and actually interest. So I think what I've seen happen with a lot of people, salespeople and others, their face isn't showing the interest, and they might be highly interested. So there's a term out there, we won't use it on this podcast, but it's called resting grump face, right? And so there will be people that have this resting face, and it is sending off the wrong message, which either says I'm disinterested, and they're not. They're highly engaged, but they can be triggering people because of exactly what you said. They're not paying attention to how that face is showing up. I can give you one more example.
Sure, yeah, go, sure.
Well, so you just reminded me of this because when we're teaching, I've taught this in class where, this emotional expression, people are looking to see if it's congruent, right? They're always going, can I trust this person, like this person? So if you watch some of the pundits on whether it's CNN or Fox, and I can pick on some of the women because I am a woman, but they will be on TV and they've got this big smile on their face and they're saying something like, and we just had another act of terrorism, or there's a war that broke out. And you're looking at their face and you're saying you're delivering really bad news and you're smiling. That's called incongruency.
Yeah, and I could see where it would absolutely be potentially disastrous and really cause a break of connection with the customer.
It absolutely does.
When we're talking about emotional intelligence, we've been talking about it largely from the perspective of the salesperson, but what about the emotional intelligence of the customer? Is that something that salespeople should be thinking about, should be measuring, or could we get just sort of wrapped around the axle thinking about it too much?
Well, I think if I was to talk about in terms of the emotional intelligence of the prospect, I might distill it down to maybe this competency, empathy, because I think what we've got to do on a call is, and it's a little bit overused today because I'm not sure if people quite understand what the concept is, but we say empathy is really being able to step into the mind, heart, and feet of your prospect, and what are they thinking or feeling. So now if you think about this, you're a salesperson and you're calling the prospect or meeting with them for the first time. You're a stranger. Then they've got all those perceptions of what typical salespeople are like. You're there only to close the deal, commission. So I think when you start talking emotional intelligence, I would be talking about what's their emotional state when they're meeting with a salesperson, and maybe their past history of working with salespeople, and are they bringing those perceptions into this meeting? Because that's how you adapt to the emotional cues and you adapt to the conversation.
I recently interviewed Ted Hyman, who is he sells to CEOs, big, huge enterprise sales, multi-million dollar deals. And one of the things that he was talking about was his mental routine before he meets with a client for the very first time. And he likened it to an athlete who's picturing the play before the play actually happens and trying to get clarity on what that's going to look like. I had a similar conversation recently with Mark Hunter, who I suspect that you know as well. When we're thinking about our emotional intelligence, is that an opportunity for a salesperson to just, boy, I want to be intentional in this conversation. I just need to take a moment to clear my head and make sure that I am fully engaged, that my motives are right. Is that kind of the first step in making sure that you're handling this issue called emotional intelligence properly?
Well, I love exactly what your prior guest said, but the mental prep, I call that the mental pre-call planning. And so here's what can happen a lot, Jeff, in this world. We're all so busy, right? And I'm amazed at how many salespeople, they run right into the next appointment and they don't take that 5 or 10 minutes. And I'm not talking okay, what's my value propositions questions? It's just like, okay, I'm going to get fully present here. I'm going to quit worrying about the appointment I came from or the next meeting. And the being present sounds a little bit trite and overused. However, when you really study it, somebody can tell if you're not fully present. And we've all been on those conversations. So if we don't take time to do the mental prep, right there, you've blown the first 5 minutes of rapport and maybe the rest of the call.
Yeah, I can absolutely see. Well, we've all seen that, right? As consumers, we've seen that in salespeople, and it frankly just drives us up the wall. It drives a little batty when we see that, because it really, I think we end up reading that as disrespect when that salesperson is not fully there. And then when we see a salesperson who is fully engaged, it's like a glass of cold water on a hot day, right?
Right, exactly. And this is where I will get on a rant, if I can even use that word, with some of my sales managers, because, I find in this day and age of technology, which has been a great gift for all of us, but we have not learned how to manage it. And I always just do the common sense conversation. I said, if your salespeople are constantly connected, and then they're supposed to meet with a prospect and be fully present for an hour, but they've never been fully present for an hour in their life, you can't recall a habit you have not developed. And so I find these managers really need to be running like their sales meetings. You don't have to have everybody with their phones and laptops. You're meeting to meet and teaching them the power of presence. A lot of sales managers, and I know you've probably seen this, they're running one-on-one coaching sessions, but they're answering emails and phone calls. So we talk about being present, but we're not modeling it very well in this day and age of technology.
And it's a gift to our customers when we do that. We're just about out of time. We're going to be sending people here and in the show notes to salesleadershipdevelopment.com, encouraging them to buy the Emotional Intelligence for Sales Success, just a landmark book. But before we wrap it up, give us some advice for salespeople that will help them to stay mentally strong on their journey, Colleen.
I think the number one advice I give, and it actually resonates with salespeople, is, if you're going to improve emotional intelligence, which really starts with emotional self-awareness, that's the mega skill, I would really encourage people to start each day with some of that quiet time, downtime, still time, because it's really only in the stillness that you can get clarity of thought. And that's when you can do the self-examination, right? What triggered me yesterday that caused me to respond in a manner that I regret, or was I the trigger? And what do I need to adjust or change? So I find in a very busy world, this is a habit I really installed in my life about 7 years ago once I started studying more of the EQ, and it has been a game changer. And I find for people when they install this habit, it can be that game changer for that mental prep.
I love it. I love it. Powerful, powerful words. This conversation is over for now, Colleen, but I have a sense we're going to need to chat again because this was really, really good stuff. I know that our audience is going to love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on The Buyer's Mind. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Murph, that's so interesting. The whole subject of emotional intelligence, it's at times hard to get your head around, and yet if you don't get your head around it, boy, it seems to me you're going to be in trouble.
Well, and I was encouraged because at least it's a learnable skill. I was a little concerned that if you didn't have it, you were doomed.
Murph, I think what we're talking about is a matter of scale. I don't think really it's a matter of you not having emotional intelligence. Everybody has emotional intelligence. It's the question of how strong that emotional intelligence is. So if you have a very low level of emotional intelligence in the world of sales, you're probably going to struggle. Can we work on it? Yes, we can work on it. But it's going to be a difficult uphill battle. But I would argue that in sales, you need a lot more emotional intelligence than you do in other jobs. And the reason I say that is because you're dealing with customers who are highly emotional. And they will trigger your own emotion. They will trigger, if you're not careful, and if you let them, they will set off emotional triggers that you don't want set off. So I think that this is a scale thing.
Great. Very helpful. Thank you, Jeff.
And I think the other thing in sales is oftentimes we like being the man, so to speak. I like having the answers. I like being able to solve problems, but it sometimes turns into the Jeff Shore show and the customer is no longer the star, right?
And that's what we should be tuning into, right? I mean, if you're a salesperson and you're not meeting the needs of your customer by listening to what it is they're feeling, then how can you ever get them what it is they need? You won't understand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A few key takeaways here and action items for you, our listeners. First of all, if you're a sales leader, emotional intelligence can be learned. But is it worth it? That's a great question. If you're studying this and you have a salesperson with a very low amount of emotional intelligence, you got to ask yourself the question, is it really worth it? Is it worth the amount of time? How good can this person be? And I'm not suggesting that you should just let him go, but boy, it may be such an uphill battle that it may not be worth it. If there's a sales call, you want to make sure that you're careful about your emotional attachment or your level of emotional attachment. So Colleen suggests you stay emotionally detached. So if you're a sales professional, we want to make sure that there is an emotional expression, but you're not getting so wrapped up into the emotion that you move off of your playbook, that you can't think clearly as to what's going on. And then another action item, and I think this is so powerful, begin your day, start in the stillness. Start in the stillness. This is wisdom literature going back thousands of years, and you'll see it over and over again. This whole idea of rest, be still, be calm, of take that time to picture yourself in the moment and to think about what it is that we do, the way that we serve people and the way that we serve people effectively. But sales is a go-go job. There is so much that's going on at any given time, and we want to make sure that we're stepping away from that hustle and bustle and taking that time to be still and to get our head on straight. And that really leads us sort of into the wrap up here. And I just want to talk about your own emotion, especially if you're having a bad day, because let's face it, sometimes in sales, life happens and we have a bad day or a bad year or even a bad life. And the question is, how can you be your best self when things aren't going particularly well? I mean, let's face it, it's going to happen. You're going to have times where, you're struggling somehow. You've got a health issue. It's a problem with your significant other or your teenager or your boss. It could be any number of things. Maybe you're a little down or sales aren't going well. You're in a slump. What do you do? What do you do when things aren't going particularly well? And I want to suggest to you that the most important thing that you can do is step away from yourself by stepping into your customer. Use your customer as a form of therapy. I'm going to talk to this customer right here, and you know what I'm going to do? For the next however long this conversation goes, I am going to so fully pour myself into that customer that I can't think about anything else. I won't be able to think about anything else. This reminds me of an interview that was done with the late Yul Brynner, who did the show The King and I on Broadway 5,000 times. How do you get up for a show 5,000 times? You think out of 5,000 days that he didn't have a bad day sometimes? They didn't want to just kind of mail it in? And you know what he did? He used to think about it in the terms of the guy in row G, seat 6. The person in row G, seat 6, it's opening night. And it's closing night. It's the only performance of The King and I that guy will ever see. So he put himself into the position of the person that he was performing to, because ultimately that's what it's about. Who is this for? Is this for me or is this for my customer? If it's for me, yeah, I'll throw a pity party. I'll feel sorry for myself over what might be very legitimate issues. But if this is for my customer, I'm going to step outside of myself. I'm going to so totally pour myself into that customer that I won't have time to think about anything else. It's a great way to be able to serve your customer and to serve them well. Hey, at the beginning of the show, I told you that there would be a contest, and here it is for my faithful listeners. Get ready. You have the chance to win the Bose Quiet Comfort 25 acoustic noise canceling headphones. These are amazing. I love my headphones. I love these when I'm traveling. I love them when I'm listening to podcasts or when I want to hear great quality music. And for the winner, you can take your choice of either the over-the-ear or the noise canceling earbuds. I love these so much that I actually own both of these. So you listen to the Buyer's Mind while you're working out. You get both a physical and a mental workout at the same time with your Bose headphones. I'm also giving away several Shore Consulting swag bags. That's 5 books, coffee mug, motivational CD, and a bag to carry it all in. Now, all you have to do is download all of the Buyer's Mind episodes on iTunes and subscribe to the podcast and then leave a quick review. It's going to take you just 30 seconds. And then go over to jeffshore.com/podcast and click on the contest link. You just enter your email address and the name you used to write the review on iTunes, and we'll pick the winners from there. 10 lucky people are going to win the Shore Consulting swag bag. And remember, the grand prize, the Bose Quiet Comfort 25 acoustic noise canceling headphones or the noise canceling Quiet Comfort 20 earbuds. You can take your pick. All right, good luck with that. That's a wrap on our podcast, The Buyer's Mind. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, go out there and change someone's world.